Hello. I'm very grateful that I get to introduce the next speaker. It happens to be my wife. Adrienne has been here now for 22 years. She went through the program. She's been at the Women's Center now for 18, 20 years, somewhere in there. She's been a counselor. In the last few years, she went through 300 hours of continuing education to get a CRADC degree, which is a certified reciprocal alcohol and drug counselor for the state of Missouri. She's a Missouri Credentialing Board supervisor. She's a great mother, great wife. So please, let's give her a round of applause as she comes up.
Good morning. We are very thankful that you all are here. And I'm privileged to speak on discipleship and addiction. Like everyone else, there's so many things that you can say, so I'll just get started. Kind of a disclaimer, this is not answers necessarily. I know everybody came hoping that you would have very concrete answers on how to help people struggling with addiction, and there is none. Jesus is the answer. So for my session, it's just really giving you things to think about. Kind of if you are looking to implement more addiction focus in your church, some discussions to have with leadership, things along those lines, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So this morning we're going to cover realistic expectations, boundaries, active listening skills, and what to have in your resource center. I will frequently refer to the person that you're trying to help as your disciple, and my husband is going to be referred to in a few of these stories. Scott struggled with addiction for about 10 years prior to coming to Heartland, so I've learned a lot being married to him over the last 8 years, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. So if we can go to the slide 3. This is what we want recovery to look like. It's pretty and it's easy, and everybody knows what direction you're going. Next slide. And that's what it actually looks like. I had emailed James. I said, I want a picture of Mount Doom for anyone who's ever watched Lord of the Rings. I'm like that, because in my mind, that's what recovery looks like. It is a fight. Not only is it for the person who's struggling with addiction, they're not only fighting that, those of us who are helping them are fighting it as well. So we're in a battle, but we do know that we've got God, and He's the victor. So, next slide. Let's see. So, just like as in parenting or marriage, discipleship is a lot about you and your responses to things. And so this is your process just as much as it is your disciples' process. And it is really important to remember that. The books that we're giving away, the Recovery Minded Church, he talks frequently about, even if you've never come out of an addiction, he gives kind of pointers on how to recognize your own addictive mindset. So a very practical story is when Scott and I were first married, I didn't know that he really struggled with urges or feelings. Those things were very foreign to me because he had been out of the program for a while, been sober for a while. And so one day he comes in the kitchen and he just flippantly says, I'm having an urge to use. And then he proceeds to go out for a walk, which was not something he did a lot at that time. And oh my goodness, my mind went ballistic. I mean, every anxious thought that you could possibly have hit me in 3 minutes. So I text someone, I said, I'm really worried about Scott. And so, okay, so they check on Scott, and Scott comes home, And he's like, did you message people? And I said, well, yeah. He goes, why? And I'm like, well, I was worried about you. And his comment is, we're 8 years into marriage. This happened during year 1. His comment was, if I can't trust you to tell you when I'm struggling, I'm gonna need to figure out who else I can trust. And so I was like, oh man, okay. So I had to wrestle with that. And I had to get to the point where I could be okay to hear those things and not absolutely freak out. And so even later that evening when I was thinking about it, God was like, Adrienne, you're the one that relapsed. You're the one that went back to your old behaviors, into your old thinking, which was extreme anxiety. Scott did what he was supposed to do. So I didn't come from a substance use background, but I had plenty of other issues that I can definitely relate to, the addiction mindset. So finding stories like that in your own life can help tremendously in how you can relate to people with addiction. So this is one of my favorite portions of scripture. It says, it's 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. It says, don't you know that the unrighteous will not inherit God's kingdom? Do not be deceived. No sexually immoral people, idolaters, adulterers, or anyone practicing homosexuality, no thieves, greedy people, drunkards, verbally abusive people, or swindlers will inherit God's kingdom. And some of you used to be like this, but you are washed, you are sanctified, you are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of God. Again, redemption is possible. I felt like, pastor set me up like super well, and then John came up here. I'm like, yeah, we're right on. This is what we're talking about. So now we're going to discuss some realistic expectations, which can be difficult. Again, we are very idealistic. Addiction is complex. It takes 5 to 7 attempts before sobriety is long-term. A lot of times residents coming into our programs have way surpassed that. And we've been like program number 12, the 14th attempt at sobriety. So it's deep. Next slide is celebration. It's easy to get bogged down in all the hard things, but there's a reason why AA gives you tokens, because you've earned that. You have a reason to celebrate. So celebration is finding out what's meaningful to your disciple. If it's a pat on the back, if it's a, hey, let's go out for dinner, just some way to acknowledge, like, you've met this milestone. Last week you said you were going to go out and hunt for jobs, and this week you came back saying that you got a job. Let's celebrate that. The next one is be prepared for setbacks. It's challenging, but it's so rewarding. I was talking to someone earlier, and we can definitely get in the mindset that I have all the answers you need. That's not true. We may think that we do, and we may have really good ideas, what we think other people should be doing, but unless your disciple owns that decision, it's never going to be their decision. So sometimes you have to take a step back and let people make that decision and let them face the rewards or consequences for those decisions. We have a 5-year-old daughter. I try to do that. Because it's so important that people connect. My decision led to this reaction. So it's letting them do that, and then being there for support is really important. Encourage independence. We're going to talk a little bit later about having a resource center, but equipping your disciples with what they need to make right decisions is the best thing that you can do. You don't want to be the answer person. It's fun for like 3 days, and then you're like, let's start you working on your own decisions now. Because again, your goal is to not keep them, to keep your disciples. Your goal is to raise them up so they can start discipling others. The next one is boundaries. And then we'll talk about time frame. John talked about this, but how available are you? Are you going to give out your cell phone number? Are you only message me on Facebook kind of person? Whatever it is, be very clear and very upfront. If you don't want someone come knocking on your door, tell them. I don't prefer home visits. Things like that. So that way there's a very clear expectation of what you're willing to do as someone who's trying to help, and then your disciple also knows what their responsibility is. Location, where are you going to meet? Are you going to meet in someone's home? Are you only going to meet publicly? Again, these are conversations, if you're married, that you should probably be having with your spouse, just so that way the other person's aware of what's going on. Knowing your limits. Pastor Chris talked about this. Sometimes we get too into it, and all of a sudden we realize, like, oh my goodness, am I really helping this person? Am I doing what this person needs for me to be doing? If the answer is no, having some people that you can rely on to help you, get them connected with the services that they need. Another story on Scott. Before he came to Heartland, he was meeting with a pastor for 3 years. And the pastor was trying real hard, and Scott just wasn't getting it. And one day the pastor just looks at him and says, you know what, Scott, I just don't think you're getting it. What do you think about Heartland? And Scott said, no thanks, and ended up here anyway. The pastor understood he was in over his head. So recognizing of how far you're willing to go, someone starts displaying mental health issues, that's not something you should probably tackle on your own unless you have training for that. So get a good counselor on your call list, or call someone that you know that knows a good counselor. It's really going to be very, very beneficial to have just kind of a resource list for your personal references as well. Accountability, this cannot be harped on enough. Accountability is just huge in all aspects of addiction and recovery, especially if you happen to be what they call a peer. So you've come out of a substance use or alcohol use background yourself, making sure that you're remaining accountable, because triggers happen. And the last thing that you want to do is to be in a session with someone and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I got XYZ in my pocket, and it flips, as Scott calls it, your stupid switch, and everything's down the drain. So you being accountable to people that can support you and help you and direct you is really important. Also, if you are working with someone of the opposite sex, kind of the same boundaries things. Are you willing? How many times are you willing to meet with someone of the opposite sex? If you're in a church, do you have a team of both men and women who are equipped to help? So that accountability, again, it's war. It is war. I know, like, when I get into deep discipleship issues at work, that comes home with me. And so I have to be accountable to my husband and communicate with him about what's going on, so he has an understanding of what's going on, and I'm not just non-communicative just because I don't feel like it, that there was something that happened. Finances. Everyone loves to talk about money. It is unadvisable to hand cash to someone who's struggling with addiction. It's in bright yellow for a reason. But you can help financially, so be creative. John did great talking about it. Offer a job. I'll watch your kids while you go job hunting or while you go to work. Take your disciple grocery shopping with you. There's probably some life skills that could be imparted in there with menu planning and healthy meal prep, things like that. So you can get very creative when it comes to finances. Direct payments to bills. If your church has a benevolence fund, make pre-decisions on how how far you're willing to help, sort of deal. And again, accountability is a huge deal. So talk with your spouse, talk with your team at church on how best to handle finances to be a blessing. Next one is spiritual disciplines. Most people are very well aware of what I think there's 12 typical normal spiritual disciplines are. But we're going to focus on two. We're going to focus on prayer and Bible reading. You have to remember, when we're discipling someone, the goal is to bring them closer to God. The goal is for you to equip them to know how to have their own personal relationship with Jesus, to where if you're not there for whatever reason, you back out or feel like it's time to move on or whatever, they still know how to have a stable relationship with Jesus. So one of these key things is prayer. Ask your disciple to pray for you. Some of this is like John talked about, like, make yourself vulnerable. Pastor talked about it, make yourself vulnerable. So when you ask someone, like, hey, you know what? I've been struggling with anxiety a lot lately. If you think about it, would you pray for me? Oh my goodness. Their eyes are like, you want me to pray for you? It's like, yes, please. So there's just that connect, and there's purpose there, there's value there. You leading the disciples in prayer, so that, because you're just, be real, be honest, don't use Christianese terms, because again, we're showing how approachable God is. And some days are just really hard. And you say, you know what, God, today was just a really hard day, but I thank you for your faithfulness. Little popcorn prayers like that teach your disciples that you don't have to get fancy to approach God. You come to him and you just say what's on your heart. You say what's on your mind. And that just develops a deep relationship. Bible reading. Let's be honest. How many of us really appreciate the stories in the Bible where people messed up? So, because we can relate to it, right? We're like, man, if God could forgive David for that, he can probably forgive me for saying some sideways comment. But especially early on, if you talk about the mess ups that were in the Bible, people are like, oh, okay. I didn't kill anyone, but I can relate to the rejection that they felt or whatever. Also, doing a study of like people with dramatic conversions. I think about Rahab, the fact that she was a prostitute, and there was God redeemed her. So being very specific and pointing those stories out helps people just be like, God's approachable, God's here. The Bible's, you can relate to characters of the Bible, and that's really important. Doing Bible studies together, sort of deal, sharing YouVersion or Bible Gateway plans with people, just as a way to connect. And that way when you meet, you've got something to talk about. And of course, the other spiritual disciplines are very important, but we don't have that kind of time. This is probably the most exciting part of this for me, is active listening skills. If I could say that anything was like the most important out of what I'm speaking about, it's probably this. And it happens to just, where's Brandy Brown's not in here, but it's my jam. So one of the big things is shame comes with addiction. Mr. Evans and I were talking just briefly about shame. Shame comes along with it. I've never met someone who has struggled with addiction and be like, you know what, I'm proud of who I was when I was wasted. It doesn't happen. Quite the contrary. So when your disciple's sharing with you, especially early on and you're building rapport, just trying to get to know each other, be very mindful of your facial reactions. It's a lot easier for some of us than others. But it is because there's so many times people are looking at you to decide, can I trust this person? If I share just this little bitty thing that's not even close to the worst thing that I've done, and they flinch, or their eyes get big, or their mouth drops open, or there's some form of rejection in there, I know this is not the person I'm supposed to meet with. So it's real. It is so, so real. And this is really difficult for some people to understand, is that sometimes when people are sharing things with you, they literally almost choke on their words. I've had residents like sitting in the couch in my office, and the head's down and the eyes are closed, and they're shaking their head no, because they're like, I don't know how to say this. And so it's being patient and giving them time, or even saying, if you're not ready to talk about this, we don't have to do this right now. But it is just eye-to-eye contact. We're Americans. We like looking people in the eyes. Again, that can be a very intimidating and intimate thing to do. So sometimes be okay with someone talking to you if they're not looking at you. They're probably studying their toes because they can't believe that they're getting ready to say this thing. You may want to consider other ways of communication. Sometimes people write things out and they bring it and then they read it, and that's very helpful to them, or give them a journaling prompt and come back next time ready to talk about this. Artistic expression, people like to draw. On the table, you'll see a couple of drawings that people have done about their stories. So those things can be very impactful. And just realize, like, this shame lifts. Like, as their relationship with Jesus Christ develops, and as they begin to trust you more, a lot of that shame lifts, at least to the point to where they understand, like, I could probably tell them this, and they're probably gonna be okay with it. And that's a great place to be. Like, when you reach that point, you're like, okay, so we're over this hill. We'll hit it again, but right now we're over it, and so that steady rapport is built. This is one of my favorite quotes by Mr. Rogers, and it says, anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. And that's the key, is they're not alone. And when we allow people to come talk to us about very shameful things that have happened to them, or they've done, or that they've been a part of, that shame loses its power. And then once that light is there, I feel like it's a little bit of a rope that we can tug on to, like, come on, come closer. Jesus wants you, like, in his lap. There is no personal space, Pastor, so... So that, I mean, like, if I'm gonna harp on anything, it's that shame comes with addiction, and just be gentle and be patient. And again, if you feel like you're in over your head, the sooner you know that, and the sooner you can communicate that, the better off your disciple is going to be, and the better off you're going to be as well. Another one is nonverbal cues. Pastor Chris is great at this. Pastor's always, I like watching him because, like, it's always an encouragement. It's like, oh, yay, okay, someone's cheering me on. But nonverbal cues are huge. You can encourage, but also your nonverbal cues can be like, that's too much. So just be aware of your posture and your facial and all those things that we don't want to have to think about. But the more you practice them, they just become habit, and pretty soon you do it without even thinking. Pay attention. Phones down, face down, computer screens locked, trying to be in a more quiet environment to where you can really cue in on what's going on. Deferred judgment. A big thing is just wait. Pastor Chris does this. Anyone that's ever been in a meeting has probably seen Pastor do this. He's reminding himself, I have something to say. But it's cool because I've watched several people do it and they don't interrupt. And when I do that, I'm like, I sure hope I remember why my fingers are crossed. But wait until your turn to speak. That's what we tell our daughter all the time. Providing feedback. Sometimes it's great to find out what role someone wants you to play. People come into my office, and especially if it's someone I'm not regularly meeting with, I'm just like, okay, before we get started, let me ask you, are you looking for advice, another point of view, or a sounding board? Because I can do any of those three, but if you tell me at the beginning, then I know how to engage my mind. It sounds silly, but it works very well. And then your disciple knows they care. They care about what I have to say. While your disciple is sharing openly for the first time, it's not the time to be skeptical and question, did that really happen? Because it's really easy to do that in our minds, and so sometimes this is their experience, and we just have to take it at face value. Respond appropriately. Whenever you do speak the way that you would want to be spoken to. Because people who have struggled with addiction in their past, they're used to people just not caring and just being totally disrespectful, you're just an addict, what do you even know, sort of deal. So when they encounter the people of God who respond with respect and ask questions respectfully, they're like, oh, these people are different. Use empathy. So try to hear the feelings that's behind what's being said rather than just the words. And the last one is ask open-ended questions. This is a big one. We're so used to saying, how was your day? It was fine. Great. Where do you go from there? But if you're like, tell me about your day, tell me about your journey to sobriety, tell me why you're here, you never know what you're going to get, and it's probably going to be pretty useful information when they start talking to you. And I do know this is a lot of information. It was hard to pare things down. So a resource center, having things available where people can easily have access to them. I know some churches we go to have EFRE has the board hanging on the wall with pamphlets and things like that. It's fantastic. So if your church has a library or something like that, having pamphlets and books and list of meetings going on in your community, counselors, doctors, where to apply for insurance or food stamps, all those things can be very, very helpful because, again, your disciple is able to find information for themselves. And when they come speak with you, then you aren't having to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out where can I get a form for insurance. Does that make sense? For the future, we want to help you. Heartland Recovery, we've worked really hard on training to be able to do seminars like this. We are working on, we want to equip local churches on how to help people that might be struggling with addiction. If it's more one-on-one things, if you'd like to hear how Heartland works, how Heartland, we would love to come share with you. Having someone trained for specifically in like substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder can be very beneficial, because then maybe that person can sit in on, like a elders meeting if there's a church attendant that's needing some help, then that their specific situation can be discussed, and the person holding the credentials can be like, yeah, that's a really good idea, or like, maybe we should try a different approach with this. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. I believe that our PowerPoints will be available through email. So it's a lot, but we want you to all to have the information that we have. Again, thank you.